Raphael. I am the events coordinator at the Berkeley Center for New Media. Some of you have seen me at these events over the last few weeks and months. My pleasure to welcome you to BCNN Commons. BCNN, Berkeley Center for New Media, is an interdisciplinary research center that studies and shapes media transition from diverse perspectives. Through critical thinking and making, we cultivate technological equity in our classrooms, in our communities, and on the internet. We recognize that BCNN is located in the territory of Uchin, the ancestral and unceded lands of Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, specifically the Confederated villages of Asham. The history of prolific technological development in this region, as in all regions, right, has always depended on the land. All of our technological infrastructure and activities take place on and in relation to the land. BCNN commits to supporting the sovereignty and ongoing stewardship of this place by our own peoples through building long-term reciprocity in relationships with tribal leaders and organizations. I'd be remiss if I didn't say we're of course thrilled by last week's news that the city of Berkeley has at long last returned the West Berkeley Shell Mount to their long stewardship. Carol Sorority Land Trust. This is a significant victory in the war of land value, and we hope it's a harbinger of things to come about beyond the area. Our common conversations that you're in right now, it's a series that takes place a few times each academic year, and it functions as an opportunity for a bit more of an intimate and informal presentation from and dialogue with leading artists, scholars, and technologists than some of our more traditional evening lecture series. The Commons conversations typically happen right here at BCNN Commons during lunchtime, and as the name suggests, we encourage conversation both with our featured presenters during the Q&A period and among one another afterwards. We hope that these gatherings offer you all a chance to meet and meaningfully connect with fellow students and faculty doing compelling, potentially aligned work in the media field. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Nefertiti to introduce our esteemed speakers today. Please do that.
Thank you. I am Nefertiti Asanti, and I have the pleasure of introducing Clarkisha Kent, pronouns she, her. Clarkisha is a Nigerian American writer, culture critic, former columnist, and author of Off Back On, a Big Bitch Manifesto. Her writing has been featured in outlets like Steam, Entertainment Weekly, Essence, Galdem, Paper, BET, HuffPost, MTV News, and more.
That's a long list.
Yeah, that's a good list. Vincente Perez is a poet and scholar working at the intersection of poetry, hip-hop, and digital culture. He is a PhD candidate in the Performance Studies program and a Poetry and the Senses Fellow at UC Berkeley 2021. His debut chapbook, Other Stories to Tell Ourselves, is available now from Rootbound 2023. So, yeah. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm really excited to be here. A little bit about myself. I'm also a poet and cultural worker. I'm from the Bronx, and I published a chapbook called Fist of Wind through the Starter Right Poetry Prize for poets of color, queer, and trans persons who are still here in the Bay. So thank you for inviting me to moderate and really dive into book forums as new media. And so in thinking about that, what would you say is the modern book? Like, what are the cultures associated with the modern book?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This gives me the chance to flex my designated emphasis in new media. My main advisor, the chair of my dissertation committee is Abigail DeCosmic, an incredible professor. And one of the first classes I took was actually history, theory, and new media, where I learned that the book itself is a form of media, and more importantly, because of new media, the word new helps us realize that no matter what form it's in currently, that there are actually old forms in the midst of our current forms and iterations of things. And so one of the first texts we read was Adrian John's book on the nature of the book, where we learn the way that the book is actually centered in the midst of so many technological processes. And so if I could just bring up a little bit of that material here. John says, any printed book is, as a matter of fact, both the product of one complex set of social and technological processes and also the starting point for another. In the first place, a large number of people, machines, and materials must converge and act together for it to come into existence at all. And so what this text really helped me realize is that the book is in the midst of something called print culture. So the printing press gets invented. Now there is the ability to mass produce books, to have a script be brought a little bit away from the center, and the printing press be the primary ways a lot of the time, especially in the modern world, now that we get material. And so print culture, the culture surrounding the printing press, and what we now have is like the modern book, was really interesting to me as a poet because I'm actually a spoken word poet. And so as I was going through the college scene, I was very familiar with books in high school, but I was not familiar with the chapbook, zines, pamphlets, and anything else. And so I thought the printing press was just simply about certain books, the Bible, various other books that everyone knows. And really what I realize now is that a book can be so many different things, and I'm really excited to see the future of what printing and the book can be with the emergence of the internet, with the digital sphere, and the way that streaming media has now come to dominate current discourse. And so I think I'll kind of end there and just say that when we are talking about books, there are whole processes involved in them, and that the books that we have now would be almost unrecognizable to folks at the beginning of the modern printing press and the print cultures that emerged from there. And at that time, print culture, there's Eisenstein, who argues that the print culture really focuses on standardization, dissemination, and fixity. And so the idea that you could have one book, it'd be standard, you print the same thing, there are no differences from one edition to the next in terms of what's on the page. You spread that out through dissemination, and fixity allows it to, if it's the same edition, you can compare it to books that are coming out at the same time, books on the same topic, and there became a new culture where figuring out how things were printed was really interesting, and setting the books right next to each other, and figuring out what they all mean in conversations with one another. So with that immersion of print culture, I want to really think about books as they are in the digital age. There's a lot of media right now that says things like, if it doesn't spread, it's dead. And this is the new kind of like mass communication technology culture. So I want to think about books in that kind of culture too.
There's so much to chew on what you said, but when you were talking about new media and the book, the quote from Octavia Butler, who I believe is a prophet and like amazing as a sci-fi author. There's nothing new under the sun, only new suns. And so to that effect, I would love to hear your take on the culture of the cultures associated with the modern book and how you approach it in your work.
Good question. I mean, technology is so interesting because it makes it accessible. Tech is supposed to make it open and accessible to people. It's supposed to supposed to make it. And I don't know. Trying to, I guess, get the book to adapt to the times. So all things, especially when we start thinking about how it can be with tech, like things like the Kindle, or remember the iPad. There were other things too. Samsung tried to make things weird, but they did. And I don't know. I like the book in that it kind of lends itself to morphing with these genres of tech, and sometimes it doesn't, which I also think is okay too. I think for better or for worse, books books are their own like institution. But as we know, institutions have rules and regulations, and there could be usually some type of culture, some exclusive culture to that institution, right? So books are interesting in that way, but in terms of tech, I think that something interesting about how the book has like endured through those different shifts in time and space and tech, right? So I think that's what I find interesting about books. Yeah, they're their own little cornerstone, and I think it is wise for us to kind of study how, like longevity, in terms of maybe hoping that our tech follows some of the same patterns too. Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoy hearing about the endurance and longevity of the physical book form. I know in our culture there's been, recent conversations around like detoxing from tech and the scrolling and like the impacts it like has on development of the brain, especially for younger people. And so when you said accessibility, I wrote down like accessible question mark. What is it? What do we actually have access to? So I feel like we'll talk more about publishing and the market and like those things, like how social media drives those things. But I'm also interested in really hearing about the specific forms, book forms that y'all have published in, which is the poetry chapbook. You mentioned it earlier as an entry point for you. So yes, talk about it.
So if folks aren't aware, a chapbook is typically shorter than a full-length poetry collection. Full-length poetry collections are typically 50 to 60 pages and up. It can be anywhere to 60 to like 100, 150. But there's a lot, because you typically have a publisher involved, there's a lot of like specifics to the poetry full length. So when you have your debut, you have your full length, it has to be a certain amount of pages, there's like royalties involved, and it's a big kind of process. So the chapbook actually lets you get away from all of that. So the chapbook can be self-published. This could be folks having a couple bucks, taking it to what used to be Kinko's and other different kind of like print copying places. They find out how to fold it the correct way. They could look online, for example, for zine making kind of like workshops to figure out what ways do I print the paper so that when I fold it, it works correctly. And so the chapbook is smaller. You can have micro chapbooks. I've seen chapbooks of 10 to 20 pages be really incredible. And so you can self-publish them, publish them yourself. And you also have the ability to, because you're publishing it yourself, care less about the modern specifics or around the book. So you get to use the kind of like pages themselves, whichever way you want. I've seen people do full poems up and down. I've seen people do where you have to move around in the book. You can print QR codes. And so it's kind of a radical way of taking a little bit of the like power and agency away from like the big name publishers and giving them back to the individual artists and creators themselves. So this alternative economies with chapbooks became really popular with spoken word poets, because if you're going through the college circuit, you're not always going to be associated with Penguin, with these big publishers, because these colleges aren't going to necessarily have an internship or some kind of connection to these publishing companies as well. So when you're driving in your car, you got back then you could go a lot of places with $50 to $100 in gas. Not these days, but back then it was a lot. You're going to these colleges, rinky dinks, you're going to an open mic, it's $5 to get in, you're able to keep your book with you that you printed off for $20. You have maybe 30 copies, you're selling it for $5 to $10. This is really good for someone in the slam community, because you're, as a slam poet, not always going to get access to those publishers, you're not going to get access to the big colleges, you're not going to get access to anything like that, because you have to like make a name for yourself. And so the chapbook is a way that you can put your, as you've actually, we've had a really good conversation about this, because Nefertiti has a chapbook as well. It's a great way to like get your name out there. So even though you can self-publish, there are some indie publishers who only do chapbooks. And so this is actually from Newfound. Based in Austin, Texas, they only do chapbooks. And so it's a great step when you're an emerging artist to be able to have your publisher know what the slam community is going for, know what kind of styles you can translate onto the page as a spoken word poet, and they might give you a little bit more flexibility so that as an emerging artist you can still get something published. And so the chapbook, I was introduced in my college years because, I had a bunch of poems that I was performing, but they were never in physical form. Because I was like not interested personally in putting 30 poems out a year, getting one maybe, mostly no's, and no feedback on my work. I wanted to directly engage the audience, and I also wanted to be able to have something with me. So I self-published my first chapbook in like 2015, and I did it all through like Blur. And so there are ways also to mass produce chapbooks, even if you're self-publishing them. So you can self-publish, you can find a publisher who only does chapbooks, but it's a smaller poetry form. It's a way to not take away your chance to get the bigger book deal down the road, the big full length, the debut can still happen. I say this is my debut poetry chapbook because I didn't publish this one, someone else did for me. And so hopefully I'll get the full length way down the road, but this is a way for me, this book form, the chapbook was a way for me to get my name out there and try.
Yeah, I think that the chapbook is a good in-between because you alluded to this just now. Self-publishing is really frowned down upon in the literary world, in the mainstream literary world, and so like you become disqualified for major awards if you self-publish, and so being able to have a chapbook is like a nice in-between where you have the support of an indie press that will help promote and market your work. And then you also have a little more creative say in like even what goes on the cover of your book, and like being collaborative about like where are we going to tour the book, or like who do we see in just in conversation with, when like larger publishers, they definitely have their own agenda, and sometimes it's like you are trying to figure out how not to lose that identity of your work in that book. So yay for this form and the possibilities within this form, especially as poets, because you're not, we'll talk about the market there, but like having a poet is just like you have to be everything. And so, I'm shifting gears a little bit. Your form is a nonfiction memoir, and so let's hear a little bit about your form and how, if there like similarities, but also just like a question that's been coming up for me as I think about like how did you find the form? How did the form find you?
Okay, so I would probably like to start with like the memoir is definitely like the fun cousin to the biography. You just get to go different, maybe darker places with a memoir versus a biography, right? Especially if we're doing like a first person thing, because I write this in the first person. Like I'm telling you the story, you go on a journey with me, but I'm dictating it to you. An official biography might not do that. And official biography also might not be as juicy, right? That's also an aspect to the memoir, the entertainment factor. So in terms of finding the genre, how the genre found me, I would say over a very long media career, as you've heard, I did a lot of nonfiction writing anyway, a lot of nonfiction, a lot of essays. My agent first approached me after one of my essays went super viral, and they're like, hey, would you mind like putting this all together? Look. And I'm like, I mean, maybe. And then it kind of snowballed from there. So it was actually suggested. I initially wasn't going to do the memoir because, like I mentioned, it requires you, to give a little to get a little, right? Like, for a biography, right, it's usually reserved for a person of a significant importance, right? Like, if I'm picking up someone's biography, they're probably someone of note, maybe a public figure or something, you know, that distinguishes them from the rest of us. A memoir, right, the person doesn't necessarily have to be that well known or established, right? But if they know how to write it correctly, right, or in a way that's very engaging, then you might have someone who literally knows my shit about them, pick it up and be like, okay, I'll read this because it's fun, it's entertaining, it's funny, it's juicy. So yeah, I initially was like very skittish about it, but I was like, with what I want to write about and with how much detail I'm putting in, or maybe not as much detail, I think the memoir is kind of perfect for that.
Thank you for naming that. The distinction between the memoir and the biography, and what it means to like author and give of yourself in a vulnerable way, to connect to an audience, and tell a more universal like story. So I think now would be a great time to hear your work. Would you like to start?
What would I like to start?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay, so I guess I'll give a little tidbit before I start. So again, this is my book that I off and on. I'll say like my first book, obviously, right? And the passages I'm gonna read talk about some really fucked up shit in terms of like politics, desirability, et cetera, right? So I'm gonna read like the initial snippet and then we'll go to the actual passage. So, how much time do I have to read? 10, 15? All right, well, let's go. Okay. So, in Salvation, with Black People in Love, Bell Hooks, R.I.P., recalls gleaning life lessons as it regards race from segregated mass media, TV in particular. She mentions that such media was a constant reminder of her subordinated status as a Black child. Bell reinforces the intentions behind such media when she talks about how three-dimensional images of Blackness were nearly erased by white-dominated media as backlash to any gains garnered by civil rights struggles. This is of particular note because whether we like it or not, under a capitalist system where parents barely have enough time or energy to invest in properly parenting the children that were dragged into the realm of existence, TV shows and movies do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of raising kids. Or at the very least serve as the origin behind viewpoints that have a 50-50 chance of being carried to adulthood. Most of these viewpoints will be bigoted and biased against a marginalized group or class, prompted by whatever social radioactive waste that said child turned adult observed while coming up on such media. Hell, not even Scrubs, one of my favorite shows, is immune to this, considering its diet homophobia, the interesting way Turk's Blackness is discussed, its constant unchallenged medical fatphobia, the ceaseless misgendering that occurs between Dr. Cox and JD, and the bizarre anti-Black running joke that was killing Laverne off just to bring actress Aloma Wright back as another Black nurse that just coincidentally looked like dearly departed Laverne. And you know, much, much more. Because of this, it's up to newly minted adults to figure out which viewpoints are truly worth keeping and which viewpoints need to be unceremoniously yeeted into the sun. Part of my own grand journey has revolved around me sifting through positive and toxic viewpoints, both about my own body and the world around me. Many of said viewpoints and the messaging I received while growing up, from parents to peers to media and general society, greatly affected my capacity to see myself as human. Or rather, it colored what humanity looked like to a fat, Black, dark-skinned little girl, and whether it was my destiny to be simultaneously visible, hyper-visible, and reviled in perpetuity. So, talk about the origin of shitty viewpoints, right? So, we're going to visit one of my shitty viewpoints that I had to change. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let us take a journey down the road of the origins of my bisexuality, starting with the phrase girl crush. words individually. Girl has an obvious definition, but when you deep it seems rather redundant to put in front of the word crush on its face, since crush is merely describing a brief yet intense infatuation with a certain someone and doesn't even particularly hint at the gender of someone in question. Still, growing up and then subsequently heading to high school meant that I quickly learned that girl crush functioned as shorthand for a couple of things. Okay, yeah. First included giving someone like myself, sometimes girl, sometimes woman, the opportunity to express admiration for another girl. That admiration can include everything from appreciating their brain, appreciating their looks, or straight up fantasizing about what it would be to walk in their fabulous shoes for a day. However, girl crush quickly took on another meaning the deeper I got into high school, and more people came out to me, especially in private. Through passive observation, I noticed that many of my straight friends, because I truly believe heterosexuality is a myth. Now that I've been on this planet for almost 3 decades, and use girl crush as a stand-in to illustrate that I'm literally too straight to exist and probably shouldn't even be admitting that I have an aggressive crush on this girl. Despite this, my crush persists, so to cover my ass, just so people don't think I'm gay, I'm just going to put girl in front of crush and everything is going to be a-okay. On the flip side, with my closeted friends, the friends who are still questioning everything, girl crush meant that I am still sort of trying to explore this whole weird gay thing, and this is the quickest and cleanest way I can demonstrate that I do in fact have the hots for this girl without any of the baggage that comes with officially assigning myself a letter from the LGBTQIA+ umbrella. So the whole idea of the girl crush to me was to take the edge off of possibly being attracted to someone who shared the same gender as you, to give yourself a moment to identify where such feelings were coming from, and what that meant, and to prevent any meddling and bigotry from Bible-thumping relatives or friends. In other words, the word was safe, comfortable even, and something you could bookmark and return to later.
It's been about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, so we're talking about girl crushes and attraction, so I'm gonna skip over to another part of the same chapter. We're talking about a problematic attraction of mine. All right. So this issue intensified when I developed my first girl crush at age 8 on Rosario Dawson. The first time I saw Dawson was while I was watching Men in Black 2 with the rest of my siblings. The year was 2002. My burgeoning obsession with television and film meant that she immediately captured my attention as the lights of Zartha, aka the long-lost daughter of Queen Lorana and the heir to the Zarthan throne. I remember thinking, holy shit, this bitch is beautiful. But you know, without the efforts. I noticed the sharp angles of her face, her huge brown eyes, and her immaculate skin. But what I distinctly remember is that hard, awful, fucking haircut she was sporting in that movie and how terrible it would have looked on anyone else. And yet, still smoking hot. At a moment, as any gay who doesn't know that they're gay yet, where I dismissed my current line of thinking and tried to focus back in on the movie. When my sister finally chimed in on how good Rosario looked, my brain registered that maybe what I'd been thinking wasn't wrong at all. To be clear, me and my sister still had a very shitty relationship, which meant that she tended to disagree with me by default. But even she concurred without a hint of irony that Rosario was indeed hot. And so my thinly veiled obsession for Rosario Dawson began. This meant that whenever I heard she was starring a movie, I was there. No matter how inappropriate the movie turned out to be for someone my age. This included tracking down Josie and the Pussycats on DVD, watching He Got Game, sneaking into the ultra-violent Sin City, suffering through Death Proof, and sitting through the immensely melodramatic 7 Pounds because I really, really liked her and her shared chemistry with Willard Smith. Word to Men in Black 2. You think I would have put 2 and 2 together, the intensity of my obsession with Rosario, plus the fact that I didn't even feel as strongly about certain boys my age, would deadass should have been the first giveaway that I was far from straight. But with the term girl crush to my guy, the significance of my feelings eluded me until I was almost 18. when I finally learned the term bisexuality in its totality after the fated quiz I took with Harlow and Eve, my friends. Put a pin in that because it gets even more thorny from there. Rosario as a crush in my life was not alone. I had been super crush happy growing up, and now that I reflect on who I was crushing on during those times, it definitely skewed toward the wildly problematic side of things, of what many of us know about desire. Pre-full-scale bisexual awakening, or what niggas dismiss as preference. Girl crush Rosario remains supreme, of course, but I slowly began to realize that my other crushes, regardless of gender, shared a very similar trait to Rosario. They were either very pale, occasionally white, completely fictional, and or light-skinned like Rosario. You want the short list? Here's the short list, sans Rosario. So this included my elementary school crush, Rod, who ironically and brutally roasted me for my dark skin and Jackson 5 nostrils, Alicia Keys, Tommy from all the superior seasons of Power Rangers, Zac Efron, who I only felt super attracted to in High School Musical 1 and 2. Corbin Blue, up until the white side of the jeans caught up with him. Nightcrawler of the X-Men, the entirety of the R&B group formerly known as B5. Yusuke Urameshi and Yoko Kurama of Yu Yu Hakusho. Brad Pitt, fuck him now. Captain Li Shang of Mulan, Inuyasha, Left Eye, Even Matt, aka Yamato Matt Ishida from Digimon. All of whom were dangerously too close on a color gradient, and most of whom would pass the brown paper bag test with flying colors. Of course.
Had to see the signature.
No. Okay. I'm not expecting that. Of course, in my even younger youth, I did the thing that all headers do and shrug it off as preference. But it started to get a little dicey when at 15 I noticed that none of my crushes really resembled me at all, and not in color or in other attributes besides maybe gender. Preference aside, that had to mean something, right? Being the head as I was and am, I think caught the importance of the ramifications of such as the realization to my girl crush was Tika Sumter blossomed in 2011. That last tip is very important because Tika is a dark-skinned actress. So that was like the first time in my life where I was attracted to someone who looked very similar to myself. So obviously in a biography, you might not hear that. You might not hear something as ugly. They might say, oh, maybe, Clarkisha has some color tendencies, right? And it'll stop there. But for the memoir, you get to talk about the really ugly, nasty shit like that and into sometimes great detail. I kind of held back, like, people were like, you held back? Like, I did, actually. That was more refined than what I originally wrote about the situation, especially where the crushes are concerned. But my publisher got a little concerned, like, maybe we should tone it down just a little bit. And I was like, you know what, fair. I feel like if I listed too many fictional characters, somebody might call something on me. But, so yeah, that is that. Yeah.
It was really great to hear those words in your own voice and, take that trip with you in real time. And I'm just like, I think a lot about pop culture and how it connects folks. And so I was like, I know that reference. I can't believe. Unfortunately, anime puts me to sleep, so I don't know that reference. But no, me too. I want to, but I can't.
You should check out Full Metal Alchemist.
Okay.
Brotherhood.
I'm here for
When you guys
But just thinking about like the ways in which we have immediate access to certain images, like they can pop up, not even if we don't fully have the image formulated in our brain, and like how that supports the work that we have, or sometimes detracts. And I want to shift now. Thank you. I want to shift to hearing from Vincente about your work, some pieces from other stories and all that stuff.
So this was published by Newfound, so indie press. They only do chapbooks, and I'm mentioning this because eventually I learned that the editors went to bat for me, and you'll figure out why after I read the first line of this. But I had been working on this since 2017 or so, and it didn't get picked up till 2023. And that's just with the chapbook. So just imagine what folks have to go through in order to get the full length published. So this was their Emerging Poets series. So it meant they didn't pay a guest judge. I didn't have to pay to submit my work. It was all figured out in-house, so to speak. So low cost, and it all worked out. They helped me work through everything, and I'm really grateful for Newfound. So I'll jump right in. I have a new perspective. Fuck you, the poem is the compromise. As in, poems always require violence. As if you have anything else to write about. E.g., the reason you have an editor. A chance to whittle your intent into form itself. This shit new, but it ain't the only truth, just the one comfortable enough to write about. Of course these poems have gimmicks. Obviously, sleight of hand reaches the tongue. I mean, isn't the page a stage too? Aren't we all supposed to remember each canonical text started from a white page? Shouldn't editors be seen as typecasters? They control the sale, distribution, and access to the product. That pure white only means as much if the cool kids only get a whiff. Thank you. Next one. Just for accessibility purposes. I can. So Honey Literary picked this up, and it also is in my book. It's called Fractals Fractions. And this is something that the poetry kind of chapbook form allows me that I might not have been able to do in other book forms. And so part of the idea is this connection all the time between blackness and data, the numbering systems that began within the transatlantic slave system, that began in the hold of the slave ship and continue into present day. This datafying, they're all the same, ditto, ditto, ditto. It starts with the ledger and it shows up in policy. And so instead of making that, admittedly complex, would probably be convoluted argument, history, politics would get involved, I wrote a poem to cut straight to the idea. So I put the couplets actually in like Excel spreadsheet boxes to get that idea across. So this is Fractals Fractions. A percentage point killed a homeless woman today. No, really. It took her into the cold street and shot her. The roundup cops were sent by some higher up. The bill was due. What are you going to do when the choice is your pockets or some faceless, nameless family you would have stepped past anyways? A spreadsheet loaded a pistol. An algorithm whispered in its ear, told him just let the numbers do it for you. It don't hurt none. It's just the way we do things here. You bring a quarterly report to a gunfight and make people forget their hunger, their children. Point out the gun and ignore the fractions doing dances in the background. Algorithms can't be drawn and quartered. This math has vivid history. Fractals become fractions in the alchemy of race science. Melting, dripping, tarring. Just remember to buy cheap and stay in the black. Thank you. Let's see if I can pull it in. I realize how helpful the airdrop function is. It's really nice sometimes. Let's see if we can get it. Yes, it is. Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. It didn't work. It's okay. Feel free to come up afterwards, but the idea for this poem is that redaction, black annotation, black redaction, this is a phrase I'm taking from Dr. Christina Sharp. is a process of taking the same lines or taking found material and slowly taking words away so that something new emerges on the page once words are taken away. And so it's hard to see, but this is the same line repeated over and over again. And I'm just taking letters and words away in order to create a new poem. So this is Erasure. This is America. This is her history. Sorry. This is America. This is her story. History. This is America. This is history. This is a story. Time is history. America erases history. This is her story. Mercy me. Is America sorry? Thank you. I think one last thing. Raphael, I just want to say thank you to Berkeley Center for New Media and also Raphael. When we first started this conversation to have this event, this new project that we're about to show y'all wasn't in the world yet. And so this is like almost a debut. It's fresh off not the press this time, it's fresh in the digital world. And again, if it doesn't spread, it's dead, so please feel free to share it. So Obsidian helped me get this published. I collaborated with my long-term friend, Lonnie Wash, to produce the actual image itself. So I did not produce the image, but behind it you're going to see a time lapse where I read over it. So this is an audio-visual poem called Cyborg's Manifesto. Let's see if Vimeo is going to work with me.
Cyborg, the realest nigga that ever lived. Though he is not the first cyborg proper, his allegorical origin is itself a fleeting, moving object. Haraway teaches cyborgs have no origin story in the West. I see this as evidence that niggas are built different. If we are all cyborgs in the postmodern age, cyborg is the human ideal made Frankenstein, an aberration from scientists playing God. Cyborg is what happens when a parasite merges with the host and recognizes itself as alive. Every time Cyborg is horrified by his image, by his father's betrayal, by the Fanonian encounters on the street, look, a Negro bot, we see what happens when a continent is visited by a virus, forced to host a death regime. In a consciousness marked by abyss, tasked with making worlds out of qualifiers. In our cinematic universe, every black dot is thing theory. Every death and tear in space-time. Whiteness thought itself light, needed resentment to live. Silas looked at his son and, like most men, saw a project that needed fixing. Both had Victor Stone fucked up. The essence of life is not control. Cyborg isn't an innocent comic book character. Even his father looked at a teen, saw a titan. This is a black-ass origin story where trauma and a black father experiment with a dead thing. Willing to suffer a life to protect and serve whiteness. A black-ass tragedy. He is so alive, so strong, a breathing simulacrum. If the fates moved life with threads, imagine Silas putting his own son back together. An experiment equal parts grief and hubris, he tried to make himself whole through a legacy. He knew his son was already dead and decided to put the curse of life right back into him. Cyborg booted up, restarted. Life is just feedback loop. Black people, they knew to treat this truth as background, as a groove to move with and never against. Cyborg shows us some niggas should have never been, and it's okay to say there are things worse than death and far more valuable than the life they keep jamming into our servitude.
Yeah, just a little bit more just about that particular project. I mean, a lot of folks might not know, but you know, Cyborg, the DC comic hero, super tragic origin story. Sometimes especially the more children connected versions don't even show his origin story because it's that graphic. I mean, his father, Victor Stone, major scientist, is doing stuff with alien, kind of like time travel, space travel type stuff. And basically, in most iterations, calls like an alien power into his lab, and in that process, completely blows up the lab sorry, Silas is the father, Victor is, becomes Cyborg. So Victor is in the lab with his dad, and Victor actually dies. He basically loses his life, and Silas realizes that he has this alien technology that if he just augments and just places on his son's lifeless body, he could bring him back, and so he chooses to. And I decided to use this as like an allegorical story about the reality of anti-blackness and the reality of trying to live life when capital L life is often just living through anti-blackness and not speaking through that reality. So what does it mean that we make people live? What does it mean that we make people suffer and we call that life? Instead of, again, a lecture wouldn't get that through, so I decided to think about this fictional story, this DC comic book hero, but also just how it relates to everyday life. I mean, thinking about patriarchy, lineage. These are the reasons why Silas refused to let his son die, because he had the hubris of thinking he could bring him back, and he didn't care how Victor was going to feel being brought back to life, seeing his body deformed in this way. And so there's so much there in the DC Comics, and they do a great job of talking about disability, about race, but I wanted to try to do that through a poem and talk about so many different things. So thank you for joining me. I think that's kind of time. We can do some more reading later maybe, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
That it's super dynamic to see like the possibility of poetry as a form, and what happens when you take the word off of the page into audio-visual elements, and also in both forms, thinking about how collaborative of a process it needs to be for things to go viral, for you to give enough and not your whole soul, so that you're able to continue in a way that feels dignified and feels protective of your image and your identity in a world where privacy, or this idea of privacy, like having a public persona online versus like being a human in the flesh, all of those things. And so I'm thinking about, it starts with the will to create, and how much, you talked a little bit about this, and like how you found what to back for you, which is so important. And so how much creative license were you able to have in your process? And, what did you discover in that? Because I think about my own chapbook, and I was able to choose the visual art that goes on the cover, but that's not like a standard. So yeah.
Do you want to cover this first?
Okay.
All right.
We covered. So in terms of creative license, I did traditional publishing, but it was with an indie press, feminist press. It was rough because, when you're indie, you obviously have less money to work with, but the license, the birth of space I was given to create was a lot. It was immense. I'm very grateful for it. The editor and etc. let me kind of do whatever. Like, they would put what I need on the page. Now, if it needed to be fine, if she thought that maybe I, like you mentioned, giving a little bit too much in the story, she would tell me, she's like, hey girl, like, do you want to leave it on the page? Like, it's okay if you don't, And I was like, you know what? Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Like, maybe I don't want that part of my business being out there, right? So I had a really good editor, and I feel like more writers should have editors. And have, not, it's like pruning a plant, right? If the plant's still beautiful, you still want the plant to succeed, but sometimes you gotta cut it a little bit to make sure it's growing how it's supposed to grow. So yeah, I was given the whole page essentially. The only thing was that, I had an editor that was still there to kind of guide me. But yeah, I think personally that's why I would usually opt to go indie, even in that traditional space, because you just get more elbow room to do stuff. Similar to you, also, I was part of the whole process, like the cover, the title. We had a thing where there was like stickers we gave out, they were like fat themed. So we had, what else? The marketing, locations that we're gonna show up to in time for like I was part of the whole thing. So my experience was a little bit more unique than most authors, but yeah, I had a good time. Could have been much worse. I talked to other, especially Black authors who excuse me, sometimes publish with these bigger publications like Simon Schuster, Penguin. I think they all bought each other at this point, so I don't even know what they're called now. Like HarperCollins, maybe, does it still exist? We don't know. But they went, like the traditional approach, and even if they got, let's say, a bigger advance, the reins on them were very tight in terms of what they can actually put on paper. So.
I would say, because it's only chapbooks, I had 2 really good editors, and I'm super grateful for them because I come from a spoken word tradition, and so my style doesn't always translate well to the page. So instead of dealing with someone who's going to be like, this isn't poetry, it was like, let's think about what the page can afford you. So originally, that erasure poem, you'll see it, if you come see it now, you're welcome to, which looks up here. It was condensed, so it was the lines repeated, but they were right next to each other, single space. My editor looked at that poem and was like, this needs to be on the full page. You need to put some space so that folks can see and think about, what if there's an erasure of the line underneath it, right in between each one? So it's like the repetition continues, everything in the poem is there, but I will help you bring it to its full life, which was it's going to take up more space on the page. Incredible kind of editing work that like really drove these points home. It was, the editing for me was never about take this out. It was always about, let's be clear what needs to be on the page, what is something you can embellish as you read it, and are you getting the things you want actually onto the page? It was really hard. I was resistant to form itself because in spoken word, my style doesn't always translate well to like meter or certain like highly specific ways of doing poetry. So I was always like, no form, no form, no form. And so my editor was just like, okay, so let's work with Black authors. These authors, you should read this, you should think about these works. And so I started to think about Black forms of poetry, and that, again, it was more creative, and it was less, this form is going to take away what you want to do, but rather, this form is going to lend itself to the kind of work you want to produce. What does a couplet help you do versus 3 lines together versus space all over the page? Every single one of those is valid, so I get you on don't do one form because it seems better than the other, but just see what poem needs which forms. And so the editing process was more like how do we make this better, never taking anything out, some help with some order, and full creative license. Because I was really excited to be working with a publisher for the first time, I took hands off on everything in terms of like what it's going to look like and everything else. Because for me, I was tired. I wanted to continue to work on the full length. I wanted to continue to think about the promo and marketing because I was going to have to do it all on my own because it's an indie, very, very small press. And so the cover art is their in-house artists, and so they took care of this for me. The in-house artist was like, I'm seeing this theme, this theme, this theme. Does this make sense to you? And I was like, oh, absolutely. I'm seeing this theme of like resistance. I'm like writing against race. I'm writing against colonization in America. Other stories to tell ourselves. It seems like there is this kind of theme of resistance. And so that came out as rose in the concrete, and what if it looked like this, and there were multiple iterations, but this is what it ended up as. And I wouldn't have liked to have chosen an image, because that's not my role. I'm the poet, I'm the word person. For me, I'm like, I'm gonna spit what I'm gonna spit. Somebody else please help me with the marketing, because I don't know what's always gonna work for other people. I know I don't have that eye. I'm not a visual artist personally. But yeah, you give me a music track or something like that, and I got you. So I took a hands-off approach to the other aspects and focused on the poetry. So that was great for me.
It's beautiful to have that support, to have editors who like believe in your work and are willing to be in conversation with you about what are the conversations that you want to be able to have, you know, once this is like out in the world. Which is a question that I like to ask authors a lot, like what kinds of conversations are you willing to have with your work? You're welcome to answer that question in this moment, but also we have a list of questions, so I want to get to those too.
Just tell me what you want to know.
So something that has been coming up is like, what's the existing relationship between, I guess, like traditional publishing and I would say media, like how are they informing or pushing one another? And yeah, I would just love your take on that.
I mean,
You got some good thoughts on this.
So, traditional publishing, I mean, there's some good aspects of that, right? Like, it's nice sometimes having this, like, big machine behind you, with your workout, etc., right? But, if you are someone that's the traditional publishing industry usually doesn't like, or favor, or work with, then it's going to be tough for you. Like I mentioned before, you know, I have a bunch of Black author friends who've written for a long time, and even as they get older, as they get more established in their careers, some of them still don't have those nice experiences with these traditional publishers, because again, we know it's establishment, right? So that's why traditional publishing is kind of like at odds with like new and emerging media, right? Like I said, new and emerging digital media in particular, you know, give people more access and space to come in. Now, sometimes what comes in may not be ideal, but the point is that giving them, giving the general public an entry point versus, you know, you pitching your work, you have to find an agent. Then the agent is like, okay, I like your work, so I'm gonna represent you. Then the agent has to take your work, shop it around. Then every traditional publisher out there has their take on what they think your work should look like before they take it on. So this is whole, it's too many people, too many hands, and you know, you get really known for you if you like to maintain like tight control on your work, as you should, right? I'll say one recent example was an adjacent agent of mine had been trying to land this like 7-figure deal for her client for like a romance book deal, right? And you know, again, deal sounds good on paper. You know, pay me $1 million and change to write some romance, like fuck yeah, right? But the catch was that she would have had way less control on her work. Like they started explaining to her how the process would go, and like besides her like initially submitting that manuscript, like she had virtually no say for them on. So she was like, fuck it, and she self-published. So like sometimes, you know, that little traditional machine is not all it's cracked up to be, and that's why they're finding it difficult to adapt in the newer decade, newer century, because of all these newer platforms that are making it so maybe we don't need them as much anymore. So.
Yeah, I think about how, like, you know, being able to have access to resources and, you know, that, which is what is the market. The market is like where you're able to like connect with people who are similar to you and dissimilar to you, and like also these are what like pop culture references are able to do to bridge those connections and things like that. So I think in the interest of time, I think I want to also open it up to the audience. I think my last question will be like, how much did the market factor into your decision to publish your project and go the route you went in, and if there's any, I don't know, sort of like encouragement or like words of wisdom you want to offer?
I can try this as a poet. Submit as long as you're comfortable with getting lots of rejections and understanding that your worth as an artist is not reliant on whether or not folks are going to publish your work. The folks that are running these industries, I mean, that's why the first line of my poem is the way it is. That's why that's the first poem, because it was basically a middle finger to the publishing world. And if it wasn't for an indie publisher, I might not have ever got it published. And so the marketplace affected everything because no one was picking it up. So then I went to a press that was like, we don't have a guest judge. We're not paying someone fancy who has 8 books and could care less about, you know, emerging artists and is kind of just really entrenched in the established industry already. We're not going to do any of that. We are here for the artists. And so they were in these rooms, like, this is poetry, let's get this published. And so it can be really hard in the beginning. So I would say try to submit your work, focus less on getting the publications and more on the conversations and the feeling it's going to have within your body to feel yourself, get some yeses, to feel yourself as, like, operate as an author. So whatever you're doing, whatever writing form you're choosing, do your best to operate as though you were already there. Because most people are already having that confidence and they don't even have the book deals, they don't have XYZ. They're trying to figure it out just as much as you are. So unless they're already they've made it, they're having some of the same questions you are. So if you can, try to get your work published, get into a community where you're writing together, sharing your work with one another, like be an artist who can collaborate. You know, when we talk about collaboration with a third, I mean, you have the press, the editor, that's great, and that's how it should be. So if you can, get you some folks you can trust and circulate your work so that you're in conversation with people instead of always reaching out because you want something, always reaching out because you want to get paid. Like, it's really good to get paid. Like, we need to be paying one another also. Let's not talk about you know, starving artist type stuff. You know, we've had this conversation a few times.
I hate that shit.
So it's like, yeah, pay your collaborators, you know, and be a good community person and just like read their work too. Don't just reach out to these opportunities so that you can get your work read. Be deep in community, and if the traditional route isn't working, try a non-traditional route. Start marketing stuff yourself. I miss multiple different kind of like streams where it's just like, I was doing slam right before Button became really popular and folks were able to translate their spoken word to Button and get it picked up. Right as that was happening, I became a father and I self-published, so I didn't have another project. When this book came out, I couldn't do the like Button route, so I went a smaller route, and I was waiting. In the future, hopefully I'll have the full length. So it's also about like thinking about the market, knowing that it's going to change, it can change drastically, and never changing your work itself. Never changing the kind of art you want to produce, but at least knowing what would sell better, and just have options on the table.
Yeah, in terms of me for marketing, I was lucky in the fact that I had like larger social media platforms to draw from, so I got a little bit more freedom in terms of what I would like to talk about. So for me, because there's like an inherent audience built into what I'm writing because of my social media backing, I got to write about what I really wanted to write about, which was like write to my younger self essentially, but also you know, my community members, right? You know, being like a fat black girl is a very unique experience in this country, especially from down south. So I was like, I'm gonna write to that particular audience. Everyone else will just have to deal. Like, if you understand it, cool. If you don't, fuck you. Like, they're like, cool, whatever. So yeah, the market for me was like kind of cutting through the general bullshit to actually find the audience I wanted to talk to. Because once you find out that everybody else, like, they might find you slow, but if you find your audience, your people, then you should be fine. Advice in terms of publishing, again, if you decide to do the traditional route, it is paramount that you find an agent that likes you. People are like, oh, you know, that sounds basic. No, no, no. People can get agents all the time. No, finding an agent that actually likes you is a different story. Because once you find an agent that likes you, they will order back from you often, especially in rooms where you're not present to hear what's happening. Especially if you're, you know, you're black, you're a woman, like you need someone in there who knows what the fuck they're talking about, and who can, you know, cuss out the right people without jeopardizing your paycheck. So yeah, like find an agent that likes you. Easier said than done. But you know, just as far as time and research, you know, I got lucky. My agent slid in my DMs. Like it's not a common experience for most people, but my friends, my compatriots, usually what happens is that, you know, we just do an intense amount of research. We stalk them like crazy, and then we, you know, we find our agent. But yeah, find an agent like you. Also write a lot, even if it's shit, even if it's real shit. Yeah, even if it's shit. You know why? Because you get it out, and then you can get to the good shit. Yeah. But if you let it like sit in there and like fester, like it's not good. It's not good. So yeah, write a lot. And then usually once you do that, you have a bunch of stuff you can draw from, and you don't have to decide what you want to write when you want to write it. It's already there because you let it out when you're supposed to.
Thank you for that. Thank you for those words. I appreciate the candidness and the openness and the real. So, does anyone in the audience have any questions for our authors? Thoughts, feelings, explanations?
Where do you find literary?
Where do you find
Yeah,
literary?
listed somewhere or what?
Excellent question. So again, since you know technology has improved, you can just go online now. Back in the day, it had the whole bullshit where you had to know someone to know someone to know someone. Now that we're online, it's much easier. You know, platforms like especially Twitter, I will never call it X, and Instagram made it so you can like reach these people one-on-one. So I could be a random internet, you know, citizen. And if I feel like this agent over at, I don't know, I can't think, the event agency or whatever, right, would be the best person to represent me, I can just shoot them an email. If I'm feeling a little more casual about it, I can send them a DM, you know, I can tweet at them, whatever have you. So yeah, I literally just go online and, you know, Google's not reliable anymore, so maybe try DuckDuckGo or something. Yeah, just find their email address or any of their socials and shoot them a message. Now, obviously, you have to do your research because if you're approaching someone with a casual tone, and let's say they're like an industry person, you might want to tailor your approach. If they're a newer agent, they might not mind you being so casual and, you know, cavalier with them. So yeah, it really just depends. I think there are some specific pages that are dedicated to putting these agents in a database. But yeah, you know, that information is available and it's out there, and I think we're better for it.
Poets and writers is good too, for poets and writers. They have like database where it's like poetry, awards, as well as like agents and curator letters. So along with publishing, trying to publish, finding a writing community, also find the literary organizations that are for writers, because they'll often have some database or job list or something they can push you towards to make sure that you get to the right place.
Yeah, there's also like different websites in which you can find literary agents and also know what kinds of literature that they're interested in. And whether or not they're actually open to new submissions. Yeah.
Also,
also a good route is to like look at your favorite books or like the types of and see, you know, figure out who their agents were, what the press was, and you know, going from there and doing research. Right? Exactly. Any more questions, thoughts?
Yeah. I have a question for Clarkisha. So, I was curious about, I know you mentioned that you said you wrote essays prior to your memoir. So, like I was wondering about how your experience of writing essays, like maybe differed or was similar to your experience of writing your memoir, and like how the affordances of each different like genre sort of, like made your experience of writing different.
Yeah, the essays were interesting because I could write them and stop at a certain point. Like there was a point I wanted to make with the essay, whether it's talking about, you know, something about race, gender, etc., or even something like pop culture related, right? I started a point, like I started a reference point, like, okay, this is happening in the world, this is why I'm writing this essay. This is how they relate. This is like, I won't say my lesson, but this is the lesson, right? And then for the memoir, I couldn't necessarily do the stop and start thing. I had to like weave, so it's a whole narrative itself, right? So I had to weave all these smaller essays or prose, weave it together to make one massive thing that also made sense. So memoir writing is tough in that you really need to know how to close the loop. You know, you can't just be like, I'm starting, stopping, you know, and leave it there. So you need to never want to assume your audience is dumb. I hate when people do that, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie. Like, I hate being talked at. Like, I'll just leave the movie. Like, but with memoir, you have to be able to walk your audience through whatever story you're trying to tell in a way that still respects their autonomy, right? So yeah, that was probably kind of the main difference with essay writing and the memoir. Like I had to do a lot more work in terms of connecting these different subjects I was talking about together into one cohesive narrative. It really tests your limits as a writer and how you feel about paying attention to detail. I have ADHD, so it was very difficult. It was very difficult. Sometimes I would get into a story and then be like stuck there, and you know, trying to disengage with its own mess. But yeah, it really pushes me to learn how to weave multiple viewpoints and stories together. It's a great one.
I've got one, just about how much you choose to engage or not with new media, broadly speaking, technology. You know, one of the things, first of all, this was an incredible talk and really inspiring and illuminating about publishing and your experiences with it, so thank you. Nefertiti, you named early on how there's almost like a new primacy on reading and the actual material book as part of almost, let's say, digital detox culture. There's a new primacy on just like paper and ink and shutting off our screens and engaging with this older form. And then on the other flip side, Vincente, you showed us this multimedia poem that you recently created. Not that they're in competition with each other, just I guess I wonder when and how do you decide that you do want to engage with contemporary technology, whether it's a multimedia poem like that, whether it's making a reel or a video for YouTube, even to promote a book, which is something that's gotten fairly popular in recent years. Tell us a little bit about just kind of your thought process around why or why not to engage with those forms or those mediums.
This is hard. I would say it's really difficult. I mentioned missing waves. If I would have been on the digital viral wave and the button wave, my name might have been out there. And now it's like I have physical, and it seems like there's, you know, the shifts and trends are going back and forth. So yeah. I think stick with what you know best, and then find others who will help you in the other areas. And so that's why I found a way that this is going to be a book. It's going to be a physical book. I don't want a PDF. I don't want something that is free or low cost and it's shared everywhere. That has its own like success. Folks have a lot of success in saying it's all on my website. It's $3. You download it. That's it. I wanted to be able to come to events. I wanted folks, because I am, you know, a scholar as well, I wanted folks to be able to touch and hold my book. Yeah. even if there was going to be a PDF of it, I wanted to try to have the focus be on the physical book. And so whenever I did add in like audio visual, this was a side project. You know, this was another publisher saying, we want to do this work in another way. So it didn't feel like it took away from my print book being in the world and being sold as a physical copy. It just added onto it. Now I can show folks, if you're in the digital world, I can, you know, throw a clip on TikTok. I can like focus on sharing my work in the digital world, but I can emphasize the physical and only the physical because that's where my background is. I want to be able to go to shows. I want to be able to perform my work and have a book next to me that I can sell. So that was my kind of shtick. That's what I knew I could do best. It was really hard to try to do the digital world. I don't want to personally have a public persona. I engage in a lot of work that makes having a public persona not the best thing. I've been doxxed, for example, too many times to tell people that like I am my work. You know, it's just like I'm the author. This is, you can pick up this book. You can come to a poetry reading. You see me elsewhere, I might have a whole different layout.
Yeah.
So for me, it helped create those distinct things. So like my social media is not like a professional author account. If you happen to get connected to my social media, it's because usually we have some kind of connection.
I'm still sitting in that, in the being able to live in the distinction of like, what is it, how do you protect yourself while promoting yourself, but also engaging in this thing that has become so vital in how we connect and also digest information, new possibilities. Like when we talked about the literary, like where do you find a literary agent on the internet? Right. So it's like that balance, and I think also being in community with other folks also helps you strike that balance in a healthy way. So I think this is, you know, we can close out. Y'all have your books here, so definitely come up if you want to purchase some books, because that's the thing. You're welcome to do so. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to talk or to just be present with Clarkisha Kent and Vincente Perez, and thinking about book forums as a media. Thank you all. I love Nefertiti Asanti, and this was really great. So
Can we give them a hand, y'all?